fellow South Africans, I'm addressing you this evening.
All your years of paying tax, you helped us overcome our darkest hour. You, along with every other loyal taxpayer, helped build this nation. Thank you for every life you saved and for every risk you braved, for giving our future generation a healthy start. When you saw many of our vulnerable communities, you provided for them. When you saw our healthcare workers on the front lines battling COVID, you rose to the occasion and gave them the tools to save lives. Without your tax compliance, we wouldn't be able to fight a good fight. Thank you for contributing to the important services our vulnerable communities rely on every day. To all taxpayers and traders, continue to pay your tax because it matters to millions of South Africans who depend on it. Your tax matters.
Greetings, Commissioner Edward Kisvetter, our special guest, Advocate Teriso Tepanyane, SARS leadership, leaders of organized labor, ladies and gentlemen. I warmly welcome you to this event highlighting the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. I'm Charlotte Govender, and I will be your program director. It is an absolute pleasure to direct today's program, which is being hosted by the KZN's Men's Forum in collaboration with Gender Equality and Persons with Disability Unit. We'd like to thank our Regional Director, Mr. Zulu, for being unwavering in his support for an equal and gender-based violence-free environment in KZN. And together with all the regional directors for taking the charge to ensuring a safe, conducive, and equal SARS. A quick reminder of the platform protocol. I kindly request that all mute your mics and only the speakers to enable their cameras and mics when speaking. We also have a live panel today, so please do pose your questions in the chat box. And I encourage you to interact with us with your messages throughout the course of this event as it motivates our speakers. The 16 days of activism against gender-based violence and femicide is an annual international campaign that begins on November 25th, which is the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, Children, and Girls, and goes until December 10th, which is Human Rights Day. This campaign started in 1991 to call out and speak up on gender-based violence and to reiterate the commitment to ending violence against women, girls, and LGBTQI+ individuals. Today, as we participate in this event, we also pay tribute to the victims of gender-based violence and femicide and urge everyone to recognize that gender-based violence is a violation of human rights. Today, we are therefore focusing on an urgent need for equality and the promotion and protection of human rights and the change that is required in institutes and the country to end gender-based violence. Honored guests, may we please join in as we sing the national anthem.
Love van ons hier.
We have all faced challenges and have lost our colleagues, friends, and family to COVID-19, HIV/AIDS, gender-based violence, femicide, and other causes of death. Today, we'd like to also offer our condolences to Mr. Dan Zulu, our regional director, who has experienced the loss of his relative, Prince Mbongaseni Zulu. Please, will we take a moment of silence as we remember them. Thank you. It is my honor to introduce to you today a leader who is passionate about equality and ending any form of violence. A call upon our Regional Director of KZN, Mr. Dan Zulu, as he welcomes you.
Thank you, Program Director. It is my pleasure to see you again on this platform. Yesterday, we were together on the most important day where we're celebrating women in leadership at SARS. Commissioner, SARS leadership, our esteemed guest, SARS brothers and sisters. I'd like to welcome you and thank you mostly for taking the time off out of your busy schedules to attend this event. It is indeed a very important event in the history of this country and also in the world as a whole. As we sit here today, I'm sure we know that a woman is raped, a child is abused, or another woman is being killed. So today we are starting the 16th day of activism against gender-based violence. And it mustn't be 16 days, it must live with us forever. Commissioner, we have been very outspoken about this topic, making it clear to staff that SARS has a zero tolerance approach to gender-based violence and all violence in all forms. Just over 2 years, you encourage all SARS employees to make a commitment to take tangible actions that would see the organization become a gender-based violence-free environment. I believe we have already reached 95% of employees who have taken the pledge, and we continue to encourage those who have not taken the pledge to do so. Understanding that we are striving to exemplify the values of integrity and respect that we hold dear within SARS. At the same time, Commissioner, you also encourage the regions to start the Men's Forum in order to create a platform where men could discuss issues around GBVF, ideas of what it takes to succeed in the contemporary world and empower them to deal with everyday stress. This was something that was very close to my heart, and we immediately sprang into action and put a team together to start organizing. On the 25th of August, 2020, we held our first Men's Forum in KZN, something which has grown to be a regular feature in our region. In fact, last week we held our 7th Men's Forum, and it has been incredibly gratifying to see how well received and impactful they have been. We have managed to cover themes such as how to father a nation, breaking the silence when it comes to violence, how to raise a boy child, and in dealing with how to raise a boy child, all men in KZN, including all our sisters, we found a school in Mlazi where we bought toiletries for all girls. It was overwhelming, the support that we got from all the men in SARS. We also dealing with depression and suicide. And most recently, as early as last week, we had another Men's Forum where we're discussing relationships in a broader sense. We also set up a dedicated mailbox to deal with questions and following these forums. And we've had a number of men reaching out for help and have referred them to wellness. We've also helped other regions to set up their men's forum. So we're not alone on this journey, ladies and gentlemen. The whole idea of these meetings is to make a positive difference in our staff members' lives, not only for the sake of SARS, but also for their families and ultimately their communities. It is gratifying to know that if you touch one person, it has a ripple effect on so many people. I've always emphasized that the men's forum are not designed to bash men. It's a congregation of concerned men who want to get rid of GBVF in this country. Just as we've offered support and education in this area, we also take the Commissioner's hardline approach to GBV seriously. There have been a couple of instances where we have had to take disciplinary action against staff members for stepping over the line when it comes to aggressive and abusive behavior. And we'll continue to do so. There is no room in SARS for chauvinistic and political and aggressive behavior. We will continue to roll out initiatives and interventions that will ensure that we educate, inform, hold dialogue, and change mindsets around gender-based violence. As SARS, we are committed to being the change and the voice that's only needed in these turbulent times. Our country is facing serious issues of gender-based violence. Over the past few weeks, we've saw a 4-year-old being raped. What a shame on us as South Africans. Together, we believe we can and will make a difference. Everything we do in these forums is aligned to our SARS leadership model around stewardship and care and growth. And we encourage our men to serve women with dignity and unlearn all the bad behaviors and beliefs. I am of the strong opinion that there is no culture nor religion that encourages abuse of women and children. Our late king, King Zwelithini, always spoke against men who rape and abuse women and children. And we need to continue that legacy. Without any waste of time, I thank you, Program Director, and I would like to welcome our esteemed Commissioner, who we all know it does not need an introduction. Commissioner, the podium is yours so that we can listen to your wise words. Commissioner.
Mr. Zulu, thank you so much for those beautiful remarks. Commissioner is currently having some technical difficulty joining us, so we'll hand the platform to him a little bit later on.
The Commissioner is here.
Oh, welcome, Commissioner. Lovely to see you on the platform. Over to you, Commissioner.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Charlotte. I think you're taking over a full-time role as Program Director. We were on a platform yesterday together as well, and on the same lovely platform highlighting the wish we have for our female colleagues. You know, about 2 days ago, when I opened the newspaper and the minister had again it breaks my heart to know that I live in a country that is statistically one of the unsafest countries or places on earth for women. That I form part of the gender characterization of males who are often the perpetrators of this violence. You know, our wonderful father, Nelson Mandela, reminds us that no one is born to hate. We learn to hate. No one is born to be violent towards another person. We learn to be violent. What is it about us that turns to violence, that turns on each other? What is it that drives such senseless and dehumanizing behavior? And in particular, what is it about us where men, and often men who are physically stronger, feel that the way they need to assert themselves is through acts of abuse and acts of violence? And against children. We cannot remain silent in the face of such deeply disturbing behavior in our society. I always remind myself and others wonderful aspiration in the preamble of our Constitution, that we want to create a society that heals the division of the past, that advances the democratic right of every individual, and in this case, every woman should feel that that right is also accorded to her, or every child should feel that that right is also a right that they can draw on. And sadly, that is not always the case. And very often, it is abused by someone who is close in your life. Someone who you should be able to lean on to take care of you, to be a protector. And I don't say that in a chauvinistic way, but every woman should feel a sense of belonging, a sense of there's someone who would step up and say, I am on your side. Not because I think you are weak, but because I think you are worthy of my attention, of my care, of my compassion. As a society, to live up to that precious gift that our Constitution promises us, that every one of us can be our true, authentically self, that every and discover our full potential without fear of being victimized, of being vilified, of being made to feel a lesser person. We have learned during the COVID period that the people who are most vulnerable to the ravages of a pandemic are women and children. We learn through economic crises, and when there's a downturn in the economy, that the people who are most vulnerable to suffer economic loss are women and children. Households, we have women who step up and are the principal providers. And it is shameful that we as men cannot find it within ourselves to do more, to be more, and to provide that environment where our women, our partners, our children can feel safe, loved, cared for. We want to leave no one behind. No child should feel compromised or at risk. No young girl should feel that they cannot live up to their full potential simply because they are a girl. And the burning question amongst us as men, as Dan always eloquently, or Musa, KZN, always reminds us, we have so much more to do as men. We have so much more to do to not just stand by and be witnesses to gender-based violence, be witnesses to the abuse of women and children, but that we become restless and relentless in the level of activism to change this, to create the kind of future our own loved ones can feel safe. An environment that we want for our own must be the environment we want for everyone. It must be beyond just being an aspiration of life. At SARS, you will know we have addressed this very actively by saying we don't just want 16 days of activism. We want 365 days of activism against the abuse of women. We want to unite around this theme of activism to end gender-based violence and femicide. Today is a very public platform, but I want to encourage every man in SARS to use every opportunity to make it absolutely clear whether the empowerment of women is not just an economic imperative. It is an imperative that is central and integral towards transforming a society that is socially cohesive. Everything starts in the family, but does not end there. It has to extend to the community. It has to extend to the broader, every town, every city, every province, and ultimately our country should be a zone embracing the potential of every woman. I want to come back internally and make through this short address an ardent request that the wonderful women on this platform, we work together and we identify more practical steps to take us beyond our wishes and our aspirations, to embed practical actions on a daily basis at every corner of our workplace. And Mr. Zulu earlier referred again to the men's forum, that it be a forum not of just talking about ideas, but talking about stepping up our activism and implementing more plans. And the reason I'm addressing both men and women, because we don't want to be as arrogant as to think that we know what's best for you. And therefore, we want to ask you to help us, to teach us, to guide us how to be better men, and to work with us to say, how do we create a safer environment that we have through our female colleagues, who brings a perspective that is so much needed in the workplace, a softness, a kindness that is often not characteristic of male leaders, of male colleagues. Help us, teach us. We want to be better, and we want to be better with your help and with your support. We want to be better for you and for our country, and for every young girl out there who is not yet in the workplace, and for every baby able to look forward to going to school in a safe environment, forward to going to study in a safe environment, forward to entering the place of work, knowing that they will be loved, cared for, embraced, and that their full potential will be nurtured. We owe that and nothing less to ourselves and to each other. Thank you for inviting me onto this platform. I remain committed to serve you in whatever way you believe I can do so better, in a way that will transform SARS into a workplace that is truly embracing, truly nurturing of every support that, and to ensure that you can find your place amongst the 12,500 individuals at SARS and feel no less, because you are no less. Each one of us have equal worth. That is my commitment to you.
Commissioner, thank you. It is truly a privilege to have been sharing this platform with you again. And I think your presence on this platform echoes your sentiments and your pledge towards ending gender-based violence and to bringing equality to SARS. Thank you again for joining us. Our next speaker is Ms. Mandisa Mbekeni, who is the head of Gender Equality and Persons with Disabilities Unit, a transformation activist who will share SARS strategic position on the equality and gender-based violence-free environment at SARS. Over to you, Ms. Mbekeni.
Thank you, Program Director. Program Director, Commissioner Edward Kisweta, our guest speaker, Mr. Teriso Tipanyane, our co-host, Mr. Den Zulu, SARS leadership, leadership of organized labor, leadership of the KZN Men's Forum, distinguished guests, fellow colleagues, good afternoon. Today marks the first day in the international observance of the 16 days of activism. For me personally, it is the start of what is always a reflective and sad period, because it embodies how, as a generation, we have failed ourselves, our children, and humanity. We now need 16 days of intensive focus to remind ourselves and each other that the level of violence against women, children, persons with disabilities, the LGBTI plus community is unacceptable. This year, for me, for the first time in my life, I have been plagued by long-term ill health. And just as I saw the light at the end of a very long tunnel, I got the worst injury my body has ever endured. When I shattered my shoulder, and doctors have told me there is a term for the fractures I have, which is called a commuted fracture, and I am still recovering from this. I've taken this time as a personal crucible in my life's journey. Crucibles are known to have and to be a personal crisis, which also gives one an opportunity to reflect. In my crucible, I have a newfound appreciation of Maslow's hierarchy of needs and the importance of safety, security, good health, especially mental health. One of my many reflections has been on the meaning of violence in GBVF. I have come to deeply appreciate that violence does not always result in blue eyes and physical signs of abuse. Violence impacts vulnerable groups and all of us because we fail in the most basic requirement of humanity, to look out for one another. Subtle forms of violence in abuse of power, emotional and and psychological abuse are just as serious and as long-lasting as blue eyes, if not longer. Franz Fanon says, and I quote, "Each generation must discover for itself its mission, fulfill it, or betray it." I believe as a generation in South Africa, we must and have to acknowledge that we have lost our way. We have lost Ubuntu, the basic human consideration to treat each other with dignity and respect. Umuntu, umuntu, ngabantu. There is no me without you, and there is no you without us. Advocate Thuli Madonsela reminded us of the fact that we can go far if we go together. She even serenaded us by singing "This Little Light of Mine." Advocate Tseriso, we are not putting you on the spot. Singing is not a prerequisite for this keynote address. The next guest that we had at our national event of this nature was Justice Edwin Cameron. Justice Cameron reminded us that certainty of consequence to events and incidents of GBVF is the deterrent that we should aim for. He urged us not to be desensitized by the prevalence of violence. In our context, this speaks to our policies, our code of conduct, and the value chain that responds to reported cases. Continuous improvement in shortening the timelines for investigation and responding to grievances and disciplinary cases effectively, and ensuring consummate sanctions and restorative justice is critical. But, distinguished guests, I digress. I am here to report on our progress when it comes to the SARS response to GBVF. Our plan sets out to provide a cohesive strategic framework to guide the institution's response to this scourge. It is founded on constitutionally entrenched human right to be free of all forms of violence. The initiative and interventions are squarely based on the national strategic plan of our country on GBVF. We at SARS aspire to create a safe, diverse, equal, inclusive, conducive, and gender-based violence-free and femicide-free environment for all to realize their full potential. In our attempts to facilitate and promote a GBV-free SARS, allow me, colleagues and distinguished guests, to mention 9 areas of the work thus far. In 2019, we introduced the SARS Says No to GBV pledge. For the sake of our guest speaker, I will just highlight that this pledge charges all of us to speak out against any incidents of violence, harassment, or intimidation. The pledge advocates for a zero tolerance to any form of gender-based violence. It also charges us all to adhere to the SARS values, the leadership ethos, to ensure the eradication of all forms of gender-based violence. We need to continue to encourage all employees to take the pledge. And at this point, I am happy to announce that 95% of SARS employees have indeed taken the pledge. But taking the pledge is not the end. We need to live by what we pledge. The second point I would like to highlight is the rollout of the men's forums in the regions. Out of the 9 regions, 6 have the men's forum. And in this regard, we are hoping to roll out the final portion of that number in this financial year. The men's forum, as Mr. Zulu has indicated, is a platform for engagement, men leading as positive partners in an effort to eliminate gender-based violence. And this platform also assists in strengthening the response and support that we give to each other as we eradicate gender-based violence. These forums are owned and chaired by regional leadership. A need to have a men's forum for customs has been identified, and the C modality has been prioritized with the aim of launching it in this financial year and later in 2023 to roll out to the other modalities. And we would like to thank the customs leadership in our collaboration in this regard. SARS has also communicated widely on its stance on GBV through various means, both internal and external. Internally, we have had internal communications, we have had a number of survivor testimonials that remind us of the deep impact of gender-based violence, which is lifelong for those who go through it. We also have posters that have been distributed to all SARS premises and offices, including border posts. These posters should be displayed for both internal and external stakeholders. Ongoing support is given to victims and survivors of gender-based violence, bullying, intimidation, and all forms of harassment. Fifthly, the code of behavior or the code of ethics has been revised. In this regard, I would like to indicate that it promotes a workplace climate which is free of any harassment, bullying, or discrimination. It provides for the support to employees who may be harassed, intimidated, or victimized. It also indicates the need to take individual and collective accountability for each other's behavior. And a very contentious point has also been added, the need to refrain from workplace romantic relationships with direct reports. Number 6, sexual harassment, bullying, intimidation in any form is now classified as a serious misconduct. This demonstrates that SARS is committed to eradicating the ills of GBV. The anti-corruption unit is working with us to ensure that investigations of serious misconduct such as these, alongside with fraud and corruption, are indeed efficient and effective. 7th, SARS has begun engagements with both customs and business external stakeholders to explore joint initiatives to eradicate GBVF in the South African customs ecosystem, prioritizing the borders. Number 8, I'm close to the end. The rubber hits the road, colleagues, in our interactions with each other. Let us renew our commitment. Let us live the pledge, and interventions are in place to ensure we constantly remind ourselves of the pledge that we've taken. Lastly, colleagues, the Declaration of Human Rights charges us to ensure an equal public service. This means that as an institution, we need to ensure that our workplaces and premises are indeed GBV free, so that taxpayers and traders get their service in a GBV free environment. Various interventions are at an advanced stage of discussion and implementation. As I conclude, Program Director, we need to practice mindfulness in all spheres of our lives. We need to be mindful of ensuring that we are decent and respectful when it comes to engaging each other. We need to be active listeners with empathy. We need to be diligent in our work. Are we just ensuring that we fulfill the requirements of our roles, or are we going a step further to ensure that we together, as the Commissioner indicated, build a cohesive society? This becomes important in these turbulent times in our economy and in our country. Personally, I pledge to be the change that I would like to see in all spheres of my life. I pledge to do what I can in the space I'm in, to throw in a positive pebble in the pond that is SARS, hoping for positive ripple effects. As individuals, let's advocate for Ubuntu to be lit in our time, and let no evil happen in our presence without opposition. Let us uphold human rights and reflect on how we can impact our institution and communities positively. In conclusion, Program Director, distinguished guests, allow me to leave a gift to the KZN Men's Forum. I would like to deposit the poem called If by Rudyard Kipling. For those who love tennis, it hangs at the entrance of Wimbledon in London. The poem is about a father addressing his son to have faith in himself. The father reveals the secret to his son to become a better human being. In the interest of time, I will not read the poem, but I'm depositing it as part of our collective literature and reference as we all strive to improve our collective consciousness. With that as a conclusion, Program Director, I thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mandisa, for taking us through those 9 key areas. And we will definitely read the poem that you referred to. As articulated by Mandisa, SARS, led by Commissioner, took a decision to prioritize an inclusive, safe, and conducive environment for all persons that are employed, acknowledging that harassment, gender-based violence, and femicide disproportionately affects the vulnerable and marginalized. As a result of this strategic decision, the organization is working tirelessly to ensure that SARS progresses and ultimately attains equality for all SARS employees. The next video takes us through the stance that SARS has taken on equality.
We at the South African Revenue Service aspire to create a safe, diverse, equal, inclusive, conducive, and gender-based violence-free environment for differently abled persons, for all to realize their full potential. We have taken bold strides to ensure the delivery on the organizational strategic intent of diverse and engaged employees in a high-performance culture. This is underpinned by the constitutional aspiration of dignity for all, gender equality, and respect for human rights. We embrace the principle that women's rights and the rights of persons with disabilities are human rights. Led by Commissioner Kisvetter, SARS has enhanced consultation and engagement structures and policies, including new launched initiatives that are aimed at inculcating the values of human dignity, equality, and ensuring a non-racial and non-sexist workplace. Through many interventions, SARS is focused on developing and supporting a journey to advancing gender equality and diversity. We believe that the future of our country lies in ensuring equality for all to realize their full potential.
It really makes me proud to be a part of this organization. Please remember that we do have a panel discussion and your questions will be appreciated in the chat box. Next on our program is Mr. Anand Govender, a member and chairperson of the KZN Men's Forum, who will introduce our guest speaker and thereafter hand over the platform to Advocate Tepanyane. Thank you.
Thank you, Program Director. Good afternoon to the SARS Commissioner, Mr. Edward Kisvetter, SARS leadership, esteemed guests, ladies and gentlemen. As we mark the start of 16 days of activism, we need to reflect on how we can make a difference. By attending today, you are an activist for change. It is a privilege and an honor to introduce the keynote speaker, Advocate Sediso Tipanyane, who will lead us into a discussion around the theme of 16 days of activism. Advocate Tipanyane holds a BSc, LLB, LLM in Constitutional Litigation, and LLM in Corporate Law. He is the chairperson of the Southern African Institute for Responsive and Accountable Governance, former Chief Executive Officer of the South African Human Rights Commission, and former Chief Executive Officer of the SAFA South Africa Foundation. He has spent over 13 years in the South African Human Rights Commission as head of research, mainly responsible for the monitoring of economic and social rights and access to information rights, before becoming the Chief Executive Officer. He is also a former researcher on criminal justice at the University of KwaZulu-Natal and former law lecturer at the University of the Western Cape, focusing on criminal procedure, Columbia University Law School in New York, focusing on African human rights systems, Ramapo College of New Jersey, focusing on African politics and human rights. He has numerous publications on human rights issues and has presented conference papers in over 20 countries in Africa, Europe, America, and Asia. He is an admitted advocate of the High Court of Lesotho and South Africa and served on the Project Committee on Child Justice of the then South African Law Commission. He is a member of the Executive Committee of the Council for the Advancement of South Africa's Constitution, CASAC, and a former board member of the Open Democracy Advice Center. Welcome, Advocate Tipanyane.
Thank you, Mr. Govender, Program Director. I also want to pay my regards to Commissioner Kisvetter and the colleagues, and really thank you for this opportunity to reflect with yourselves on the challenges around gender-based violence and femicide in our country. In terms of the title of my address today, Building Back Better and Ensuring the Protection and Promotion of Human Rights, a world free from gender-based violence and femicide. And coming from a very religious background, a thought struck me as to what is said in the Bible, that a wise man builds his house on a rock, and a foolish man built his house on sand. And therefore, it's quite clear, which also then informs the subject of my presentation today around social contract. It therefore reminds me that, we cannot build better societies if we build them on sand.
And in this case, building a house on sand is equivalent or linked to gender-based violence, which means then if we continue to perpetrate gender-based violence and femicide, we are basically not different from the foolish man referred to in the Bible who builds his house on sand. So going back to my presentation then, let me start then as follows, that societies are established to protect and advance the interests and the well-being of individuals. And of course, individuals constitute the basic building blocks of society. And of course, individuals also establish governments and other relevant institutions in order to protect their interests and rights. In this regard, laws, including policies and regulations, are adopted and implemented to regulate interactions amongst individuals and interactions between individuals and their governments and public and private institutions. And therefore, this helps to ensure peaceful and harmonious existence amongst them or human beings. And I guess in legal terms, we say the rule of law. Without the rule of law, there is chaos. Now, in this context, human rights norms and standards have evolved and continue to evolve and develop to protect the rights of individual members of society and associations against infringement of their rights by other human beings or government institutions or other institutions. Now, the social contract theory pronounced by the likes of John Locke, Rousseau, Durkheim, and others informs the formation of societies and the need for, and the purpose for setting up the societies, which is then to protect the common good of human beings and enable them as a collective to face challenges and threats, which might then affect all of them. Now, the social contract theory is what then keeps societies together and similar to the wise man or wise woman who builds his house on a rock as opposed to the foolish man. Now, in outlining the post-apartheid society, President Nelson Mandela, in his inaugural speech, said the following, and I think this actually captures the essence of a social contract. It captures the essence of building our house or societies on the rock. It captures the essence of us fighting against gender-based violence and femicide. He goes as follows: we enter into a covenant that we shall build a society in which all South Africans, both black and white, will be able to walk tall without any fear in their hearts, assured of their inalienable rights to human dignity, a rainbow nation at peace with itself and the world. He goes on to say that our single most important challenge is therefore to establish a society, a social order in which the freedom of the individual, both men and women, will truly mean the freedom of the individual. Then he says, we must construct that people-centered society in such a manner that it guarantees the political liberties and the human rights of all citizens. This is again the essence of social theory, social contract theory. Now, the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, 1996, constitutes a social contract reflecting the agreement amongst us as South Africans as to how we'll interact with each other in the post-apartheid South Africa. The Constitutional Court, in the case of Carmichael versus Minister of Safety and Security, 2014, says that the Constitution embodies an objective and a normative value system, our rock. Now, the key aspects of this social contract, our Constitution, the rock in which we build our house, includes the following: that we as South Africans, we will heal the divisions of the past and establish a society based on democratic values, social justice, and respect for human rights. And of course, if we undermine these principles, we're definitely undermining the social contract and the social fabric which keeps us together as a people. It also provides that we'll establish a society in which the government will be based on the will of the people and serve the interests of the people, and that every member of society, including women and girls will be equally protected by law. It goes on to highlight the importance of creating a conducive environment where the potential of every member of society will be realized. Now, I want to argue that, in order to free the potential of every member of our society, we need to ensure that there's also a sense of safety and security for all members of society, including women, whether it is in their homes, in the streets, at work, or in public places. In this regard, Section 198 of the Constitution provides that our national security must reflect the resolve of South Africans as individuals and as a collective to live as equals, to live in peace and harmony, to be free from fear and want, and to seek a better life. And of course, without these principles, we cannot unleash the potential from all of our citizens in order to make sure that we have a viable society. In the same manner, Section 12 of the Constitution also provides that everyone has the right to freedom and security of the person, which includes the right to be free from all forms of violence, either from public or private sources. So it is very clear that this provisions on social contract highlights the values which also then inform our society as per our constitution: the value of human dignity, the advancement of human rights, and of course the establishment of a society, a non-sexist and a non-racist society. Now it's quite clear that societies will fall and eventually collapse when this social contract is not respected and is even undermined by its members. And of course, one clear example of how the social contract is undermined by its members, it is the violence which women then execute against our fellow female members of society. So the same thing also applies to social institutions, that even at the workplace, if we don't respect these values, those institutions will be severely challenged and affected and probably collapse as well. So the lack of respect of the rights of members of society and the failure of those entrusted into power government, the abuse of public power, and the mismanagement of abuse of public resources are also some of the factors which threaten our societies. Now, coming to the impact of gender-based violence and femicide on our social contract, our social fabric, it's quite clear that we cannot dispute that gender-based violence and femicide constitutes the most flagrant forms of human rights violations. On the impact of gender-based violence, the Constitutional Court in Carmichael again said that few things can be more important to women than freedom from the threat of sexual violence. The court further held that sexual violence and the threat of sexual violence goes to the core of women's subordination society. It is the single greatest threat to the self-determination of South African women. And of course, self-determination simply means that being able to fulfill your potential as a human being, to live your life in society freely, and be able to do whatever you want to do as a member of the society. And therefore, the court also in Carmichael said that gender-based discrimination has the effect or purpose of impairing the enjoyment by women of fundamental rights and freedom. So this basically supports the argument that gender-based violence and femicide threatens our social contract, it threatens our constitutional order. Now, the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action of the 1995 UN World Conference on Women also said the following: that violence against women is an obstacle to the achievement of the objectives of equality, development, and peace, and that violence against women both violates and impairs or nullifies the enjoyment by women of their human rights and fundamental freedoms. Close quote. Now, having a constitution, having established our democracy, and institutions, clearly also in line with the values of our constitution. The country has taken lots of measures really to try and ensure that we do address issues of gender-based violence, femicide, and all forms of discrimination against women and girls. And therefore, we've passed a whole lot of acts and measures in our country, which I will not really go into, but we have lots of acts here: Sexual Offences Act, Domestic Violence Act, Children's Act. We also have we've established bodies like the Human Rights Commission and Gender Commission. At international level, we have signed a number of international instruments which also speak to the issues of discrimination against violence, and so forth, which I'll not get into. However, what is very sad is that despite all these measures taken, and of course also our commitment in terms of Goal 5 of the Sustainable Development Goals, that we should eliminate all forms of violence against women and girls in public and private spheres, including trafficking and sexual and other types of exploitation by 2030. The picture, unfortunately, today does not look that good, does not look promising at all. The recently released second quarter crime stats report for the period of July to September 2022 this year highlights a very worrying picture as far as violence against women and girls is concerned. According to this report, there were 989 women killed in this period, highlighting an increase from last year of 10%. Again, we see an increase in terms of attempted murder stats, 1,200 only for the second quarter. The first quarter was also not that much different. And we see assaults against women at 13,000, again, a 15% increase. We see rape incidents at 10,590, again, an increase of 10.8% from last year. We see sexual assaults again at 1,895, another increase from last year. This is actually a very worrying picture and really raises a lot of concerns about the state of our nation and our own attitude as members of society, and men, of course, towards women. And therefore, it really raises a concern as to whether is there a meaningful commitment by your organs of state and government to promote and protect human rights and the rights of women and children. It also raises concerns as to whether there is there a full appreciation of the social and economic impact of gender-based violence in our country and the advancement of society. Our commitment to these values is contradicted by the actions. I was quickly trying to look at the stats in Ukraine to see how many people have been killed so far in that conflict. And the figure came at around 6,000 people, civilians. And so you can imagine with the levels of violence in our country, the number of rapes, the number of women being killed in our country, we are worse than the situation in Ukraine. Now, it's very interesting that, the whole world is deeply concerned about what's happening in Ukraine. There are lots of conferences, but in our country, we have a worse situation as far as the impact on lives and lives than Ukraine, just due to violence, which we as South African men inflict on our own women and children. It's a very sad situation. And therefore, in my opinion, this does show that, laws, policies, institutional measures are not enough if we want to eradicate gender-based violence and femicide in our country and in our homes and workplaces. And therefore, there is definitely a need for a massive attitudinal change in our society and a greater intolerance to gender-based violence and femicide. And again, this has to go hand in hand with empowerment of women and their meaningful representation in political, social, and economic structures of our society. Now, Going back again to the Beijing Declaration on the issues of attitude, the declaration does point out very clear that some of the manifestation of violence and against women and girl children is due to the issue of historical unequal power relationships between men and women, which have led and continue to lead to the domination of men over women and the discrimination against women. Now, this attitude is quite similar to the attitude of racism. And we all know the devastating impacts of racism in the world, from slavery, colonization, and apartheid. And if we don't change our mindset towards women, just like, we cannot stop racism unless we change our attitudes and see our fellow human beings as being equal to us. And I'm reminded here by the words of Martin Luther King that, he wishes for a world where people will not be judged on the base of their skin color, but on the content of their character. And therefore, we will not have a major impact in the fight against gender-based violence if we don't change our attitudes and really and fully appreciate that women in our country are as equal as men and are equal and deserve equal treatment and have to be treated. Otherwise, despite all these measures we have passed, as we have highlighted, the stats are going to get worse. It is actually quite sad that 25 years since the signing in of a constitution, we are seeing this escalation in the violence against women and the girl child, which goes against the very same values which we purport to uphold. The Beijing platform also talks about cultural patterns, particularly the harmful effects of traditional or customary practices, which have to be addressed. Otherwise, they continue to fuel these levels of violence and maybe even hatred towards women. And I think we've not done enough as a country to challenge these patterns of unequal power relationships between men and women. And that's why, without taking a dig at political parties, when one looks at the list for the top 6 of the ANC, you hardly see women at the top except at the last. And then you ask yourself, when will we ever change these power relationships so that at least there will be better appreciation that women are equal to men and deserve to be treated? The same thing also applies to the corporate world, that if you look at the top echelons of the corporate world, again, you see men there, and of course, white men. So we need to do a lot to fight these patterns, both cultural and traditional. And those of us who are African people, we also need to look at our own traditional systems, issues of kings and chiefs. Are we also, not by addressing these issues, perpetuating the mindset that it's okay to see women as being inferior, and therefore violence continues? And and of course, many women know when you go to the police station to complain about gender-based violence, you really don't get in most police stations a proper support, because I guess it's assumed that it's okay. Now, having grown under apartheid, most of us, we know exactly one can draw parallels between racism as well as gender discrimination. That under apartheid, the fact that you're Black meant you're non-human, and therefore subconsciously, it didn't really bother that much that those who were then discriminating against us and killing us were that much bothered. It was the same thing in slavery. And that's why I'm saying that we need to address the issue really of attitudes, the issues of cultural and traditional patterns, if the laws and the policies and all the other measures we've instituted as South Africans to address this scourge will really have a meaningful impact. Now, coming to the issue of eliminating violence and harassment in the world of work, clearly the workplace also is another manifestation of gender-based violence in our country. Most of us spend our time at work, and therefore we do need to address these issues. And it's quite clear, therefore, that institutions can also play a key role in turning the tide against gender-based violence, other than eradicating gender-based violence at the workplace. And I do appreciate what has been done already in SARS in this regard. Now, in view of the role of the workplace, which the workplace can play in addressing issues of gender-based violence, the labor organization, International Labour Organization in 2019 adopted what is called the ILO Convention of Eliminating Violence and Harassment in the world of work. Now, this convention came into force on 25th June 2021, and South Africa has also ratified the convention, and it will definitely come into operation on the 29th of this month, and hopefully SARS will publicize this very important convention, which also will contribute to how we eradicate gender-based violence at the workplace. And then, of course, the workplace then influence what happens at home and elsewhere. Now, the ILO Convention recognizes the right of everyone to a workplace free from violence and harassment, including gender-based violence and harassment. It also recognizes the devastating impacts of this conduct on workers and organizations. The convention also requires that several measures should be adopted at the workplace to eradicate violence. These measures include enforcement mechanisms as well as monitoring mechanisms, and as well as access to remedies and support for victims. So this has been one of the biggest challenges, not just at work, that many victims of gender-based violence don't really feel free to come out and report the violence. And it's very clear that the crime stats reports which we get are underreporting. I mean, there was a study some time ago which says only 1 out of 9 victims of violence actually come forward. So you can imagine then how big the problem is. So the convention then encourages a workplace, the organization like SARS, to really do more to create an environment where victims of gender-based violence could come out freely and raise issues so that these issues could be addressed. So there's an obligation then on us to really ensure that we have these mechanisms, as well, of course, the issue of adoption of training and awareness measures at the workplace that violence against women is not okay. And therefore, we will be drilling this message to all our workers and colleagues at the workplace. Hopefully, when they go home, they'll also influence the home environment as well as other social environments. And definitely one could see a bigger change in this challenge. So the convention also provides for the need for appropriate and effective remedies to eradicate violence at the workplace. And I'm glad Mr. Zulu was saying that, in SARS, efforts are being done to ensure that, we do take action against those who perpetrate violence and gender-based violence at the workplace. We know that, issues of sexual harassment have not really been easy to deal with, but there's definitely a need for us to do more to make sure this happens. Now, through this work-based interventions, workers can really become greater change agents in the fight against gender-based violence and become positive influencers. I know the word influencer is becoming quite a popular word in our country. So we also need another brand of influencers, those who basically influence us to ensure that we fight more effectively against gender-based violence and not other things. In this regard, then, John C. Maxwell and Rob Hopkins wrote in their book, Change Your World, says the following: when it comes to making a positive difference in the world, change occurs only when someone, somewhere, takes responsibility for changing himself or herself and take action to help others change. Without the actions of some person, change doesn't happen. And those of us who have studied the anti-slavery movement, we know that slavery ended because of efforts of many people consistently for a long time going against slavery until slavery was removed. So the same thing with apartheid. So definitely it means a lot of us have to be the change agents, which John Maxwell is talking about, that we need to be at the forefront wherever we are to discourage any forms of gender-based violence or any talk or any thinking which encourages gender-based violence. I just want to give an example about myself, that I grew up in a very violent society when I was young, and violence was the norm. So we solved issues by violence. That's where we came from. So when I go to high school, this young girl made some funny remarks at me, then I slapped her. I didn't see anything wrong. Next thing, I was called by the principal to say, listen here, we don't allow this kind of things. And next time you do this thing, you will be expelled. Now, this was a bit of a shock for me, being a son of a minister of religion and a grandson of a minister of religion. And it was actually quite a shock because all along, I never really saw this as a big issue. So it does show that, a lot could be done. And I guess my deputy principal really helped to change my perspective and probably influenced me becoming a human rights activist at this rate. So it's very clear that, each one of us can play a role in being change agents. And therefore, we can, as an individual, contribute to the change in the trend of gender-based violence in our country. Now, in conclusion, eradicating gender-based violence and femicide in our country will not only help in advancing human rights, but will help to unleash at a higher level the potential of women of our society with great benefit to our economy, social and political development. The survival of our society and democracy requires greater involvement of women in our economic, social, and economic life. Such involvement, currently undermined by gender-based violence and femicide, will have a tremendous impact on the fight against poverty, unemployment, corruption, and abuse of power. And on this, Benjamin Friedman, in his book, Moral Consequence of Economic Growth, says as follows: historical experiences strongly suggest that among new democracies, the ones that succeed in achieving a rising standard of living for the broad majority of their citizens will be the most likely to survive. In short, what he's saying is that if we don't increase our standard of living, we are not likely to survive as a society. But standard of living also requires us to minimize and eradicate gender-based violence, but also to ensure that our women in our country are actively participating in all aspects of our life. So gender-based violence is indeed a threat to our society, it's a threat to our social contract, it's a threat to our future. And therefore, I want to really thank SARS for the invitation. And it's very clear to me that SARS can play a leading role as a leading public institution to ensure that we do turn the trend against gender-based violence. And I think what you are doing is commendable. And I hope that the commissioner will speak to his fellow counterparts in other public institutions to say, listen, let us form a network of public institutions which would like to take a stand in a much more forceful manner that gender-based violence is a threat to our constitutional democracy and goes against all our values, including those of Ubuntu. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Advocate, for reminding us of all our collective responsibility to ensuring the protection of all marginalized groups, to be with persons with disability, colorism, racism, LGBTQ communities. Indeed, our strength lies in our diversity. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome back to the platform Mr. Dan Zulu, Ms. Mandisa Mbekeni, for a conversation with Advocate Tepenyane. I've been receiving some questions on our chat box. Please don't stop with the questions. We would have our live panel now and they can answer some of those questions.
Thank you, Charlotte.
Kindly for joining us. Welcome. Has the advocate joined us on the platform?
Yes.
Thank you, Advocate. Thank you, Mandisa, and thank you, Mr. Zulu, for joining us today as we go through our live panel and answering some of the questions that have been posed by the individuals on the platform today. The first question goes out to our advocate Tipanyane. In your opinion, why is it that men do not regard women's rights as human rights, which are equal to theirs?
Thank you. I guess it's in line with the Beijing Platform Declaration that, you know, our culture has been as such that, and of course, to some extent, the influence of a distorted version of religion, that women are inferior and therefore they must be treated as inferior. You look at our social institutions, sorry for those who are Catholics, that the leadership of Catholics is still men. You look at our institutions, traditional institutions, to a large extent, they're still men. You look at our politics, that most political parties still put men at top, as if women are not in the majority. So if we don't change this attitude or culture, we'll really struggle to fight gender-based violence. So it's exactly what I was saying also in relation to race, that, you know, racists basically believe falsely that they are more superior than those who look differently from them, and therefore perpetuate violence in the most horrific ways, slavery, apartheid, and everything else. So one can actually draw a parallel to that, that if we don't change our attitudes and really believe the truth that women are equal to men, then we'll battle to fight gender-based violence. In any case, it's the men who run institutions of power, the police, the courts, and whatever. And therefore, if we don't change this attitude, we'll still have very little sympathy from those quarters.
Thank you for that, Advocate Tipanyane. You know, I appreciate those words of wisdom that you're leaving with us, and that, you know, the clarity that you're bringing. In your speech, I heard you mention, you know, you've recognized SARS for the initiatives that they are taking. And, you know, you spoke about influencers. With your experience as the former chief executive of the South African Human Rights Commission, how can the Human Rights Commission assist institutes such as SARS on their journey to ensuring an equal and gender-based violence-free environment?
That's a very painful question. Yes, I mean, having been in the commission since 1996, I honestly think that we could have done far more to address issues of gender-based violence. Unfortunately, we allowed the existence of the Gender Commission to basically take the lead, instead of us also looking at these issues. There's been an internal struggle in the commission to say, listen, we need to get involved in issues of gender-based violence. Women's rights are human rights. So for example, even though we sit in the UN Human Rights Council, and we can go to the New York and the UN Commission on Women, we don't go there because we say that should be the Gender Commission. So I think there needs to be a mindset in the commission, as well as amongst many male human rights activists, that human rights are women's rights. But we tend to, in the commission, really see human rights in that narrow sense. So even to look at our policies and what we're doing, we've not really done that much. It's only in the last few years, for example, when we established a gender forum, a women's forum in the commission. But even then, we're not really supporting it the way you guys are supporting your forums here. You know, I know as accounting officer, it was difficult to even allocate a budget for a women's forum in the commission. So it's the mindset I'm talking about, that, you know, if we don't change this mindset and we don't appreciate the economic importance of promoting gender equality, we'll be in trouble. And I think as a country, we need a study which can show us the devastation in terms of the economy of undermining women's rights, gender-based violence, and not empowering women equally. I'll give you one example, having spent 5 years in the US, that for a long time, they didn't allow Black men to play basketball. Now you can see what has happened the moment we allowed men to play basketball. It's gone crazy like anything else. So the same thing in society, that if we suppress women, we'll definitely not unleash the potential we need as a country to grow and become one of the leading nations in the world.
Well, that's very true. And I think before I move to Mr. Zulu, the one pressing issue that's come up from our chat box is, have we done enough in the justice system to protect the vulnerable and to destigmatize GBV overall?
No, I mean, it's a painful reality. For a long time, I mean, let me start way back. For a long time, the legal profession didn't even allow women to get into the profession. So you can see, when I finished law school and I was approached by one leading lawyer in Lesotho to work for him, and I said, listen, unfortunately I cannot work because I'm going back to South Africa. He says, and I referred him to some of my females. He said, no, I don't work with women, they get pregnant. So we need to appreciate that the legal profession has been very, very conservative. I mean, look at the laws, how long it took us to change the Domestic Act. Remember, up until 1988, by law, women were perpetual minors. There was no rape of a married woman. You still have things like lobola, where, I'm sorry for those who are very traditional, but, we still have these systems or those laws which basically render women at the lower level. And therefore, a lot of work has to be done amongst lawyers, judges, to really play a greater role in being champions of gender-based violence. So sorry for my lawyer friends, but the lawyers and judges are very conservative as far as change is concerned. Look at how victims of gender-based violence are treated by the police stations, our courts. Look at how we deal with issues of divorce. It's really difficult. So the law really needs to become much more proactive and more supportive. And unfortunately, it's the men who are in charge. Therefore, they don't really see that greater need to be more aggressive. And I think we need more female judges, more female lawyers. So as I was saying, for a long time, we didn't allow women to become lawyers or judges or presidents.
Well, I'm glad to see that at least you're taking a stand and you've started an initiative and along with SARS, that we can see a change, that's going to come into our country and to our society. Thank you for that. Mr. Zulu, what more can men do at SARS over and above participating in the men's forums to ensure that they are positively contributing to the eradication of GBVF at SARS?
Thank you, Charlotte. Charlotte, as we know, when we formed the men's forum, we were forming them to create awareness among our men at SARS. It's not the only way and the only form that we can get rid of gender-based violence. There are other organizations outside SARS who are activists in discouraging this gender-based violence. And I encourage men from SARS to get involved in those sessions, because at times when they participate in the men's forum here at SARS, it feels like a tick box, but when they play an active role in their communities, that can help. Also, if I look at what the minister in the presidency has said around gender-based violence, he said men must play an active role, and that active role is to report your friend, your uncle to the police, to the lawmakers, if they get involved in gender-based violence. And the other one as well is to call out men, especially if you are sitting with your friends, the body shaming of women or sexual comments that are passed at women. It's up to us as men to be vocal there and say, then you cannot do that. Instead, we get involved in laughing, and that laugh and giggling promotes the continuation of gender-based violence. And also, you must understand that GBV or any form of abuse, there is subtle abuse that happens in our workplace where women are treated like they belong in a kitchen. And I'll give you an example which I have watched with some of my colleagues. We're having tea or coffee in the boardrooms. Some of us as men, they leave the cup there because they expect a woman to come and pick it up. That's subtle abuse. They go to the kitchen and dump unnecessary things into the sink. Why can't you wash your own cup as a man? That again it's a subtle abuse to say women are inferior than us, they must pick up after us. I remember one day, Professor Kambule, the late Professor Kambule, said, it starts even at home when, as a man, when we are a boy growing, you leave your pajamas at the door, but when you come back at night, you want to find them under your pillow. That is an abuse. And abuse starts in small and it grows until it becomes physical. Thank you.
And I think that's very true, that what we're starting here at SARS doesn't end at SARS. That as we go out into the communities, that we make a difference and we impact in society and break the stigmas that have been placed on women in general. And Mr. Zulu, you know, we've put gender roles in society, you know, where men have so much more power is placed on them and they're crippling the society. What do you think we can do to actually break those gender roles?
And again, at work, we've got an opportunity to get rid of these gender roles, appoint women everywhere in this society, even here at SARS. They need to have a voice on the table. Gone are the days where certain roles are reserved for men. Luckily, we are in the institution where we do not advertise roles and say, this is a man. But some of these things, they become subtle. We must make sure that our women or our girls are treated the same way as the boys are treated.
Thank you for that, Mr. Zulu. Mandisa, what do you think is the biggest challenge in SARS, you know, in their response to gender-based violence and femicide, and what do you think we need to do, you know, to change the outcome of it?
I think one of the key challenges is that we judge ourselves more kindly than we judge others. And I think as society, we need to do the inverse. We need to be harsh on ourselves when it comes to issues of equality and, as Ubuden was saying, in how we treat each other. You know, at night, you need to go through your day and rate yourself in your interactions with people. I, for instance, have a tendency to be a taskmaster. I must consciously remind myself that I must engage with the person, and thereafter we then engage on the task. And we as individuals need to know our weaknesses and consistently work on them. Unfortunately, learning comes with humility. You need to humble yourself when you criticize yourself and be your own worst critic. Because if you are your own worst critic, others really can't come and criticize you any worse than you already do. And in that regard, we are able to take feedback. If, for instance, you, Charlotte, say to me, I'm not treating you with dignity, I must actually listen to what does dignity mean to you. I mustn't have a solution in mind that this is what Charlotte needs, and therefore, in my opinion, I'm doing well. No, I need to understand, what does dignity mean for you? What does being considerate mean for you? And what mindfulness can I bring in my engagements with you? And if we stop seeing each other as tools and start seeing the human in the next person. And this is why, for me, all of this, the Sustainable Development Goals, the human rights, the Bill of Rights, everything, fortunately, in our society, for me, is summarized in Ubuntu. And if we can just go back to basics and go back to Ubuntu, in how we engage each other, we will hear each other, we'll be able to deal with blind spots, we'll be able to ensure that indeed we prioritize what is important to the stakeholders that we're engaging. Because again, we don't know what is important, we prioritize the wrong things, and as a result, what I come to you to engage on, thinking I'm coming with peace, actually aggravating the situation. And I think as an organization, we need to seriously look at our trust levels between management, employees, our organized labor, and ensure that on an ongoing basis, we remember that we are working in an institution that is a huge asset for this economy, and that our internal engagements must actually be such that we don't devalue, we don't dehumanize each other, so that when we deal with taxpayers and traders, we're able to rise to the occasion to ensure an equal public service, to ensure that South Africa is indeed in a position to be able to have the required expenses funded through the collection of revenue that we do as this organization. I know I went too far.
No, but I think what you bring is a key point. And if we look back at what Commissioner started off by saying, is to not assume that we know what people want and what people need. And I think that's very key to addressing some of the issues that we have. And I have the final question back to you, Mr. Zulu, is a lot of what you said relates to culture and upbringing. How do we influence change without seeming to disrespect our traditions?
Our traditions are very key, and again, we should never go to an extent of disrespecting culture. But in my understanding, there is, if I come back to the Zulu culture, there isn't a culture, none of the chiefs in Zulu will say a woman's job is to be in the kitchen and cook. So those are the stereotypes that women must stop practicing. And also, again, the religion, as I mentioned before, we hide behind the religion and also the culture. If you look at religions as well, there is no religion that say abuse a woman. It talks around respect. Then we go further as men to say, if you want to be respected, it means you must be condescending to a woman. There is no culture that promotes that. So we need to unlearn some of those stereotypes that we grew up with, unlearn the old bad behaviors.
Thank you for that, Mr. Zulu. I hear exactly what you're saying. We've now brought these thought processes on ourselves. No culture or religion has actually imposed our thinking on women and the way we treat them. Advocate, this question is for you. Are our policy laws doing enough to respond to this scourge? Section 11 of the Constitution guarantees the right to life to everyone. Does this have an impact in the way the perpetrators are so protected more than women and children whose lives are lost daily due to no death penalty, yet women and children's right to life is violated?
Thanks. Policies and laws can be useful if used properly, and useless if not used properly. It's like having a gun and not using it, to protect life, not to kill. So it's really the attitude. That's why I was saying, attitude determines altitude. And if we don't change our mindset, then those laws really don't mean much. We are now 28 years in our country. We have the best constitution, clearly, some of the best laws around human rights, best institutions, Human Rights Commission, Public Protector, and whatever. But 28 years later, we are in a serious crisis. The level of abuse in our country of rights, the levels of violence, the level of looting of state resources is going up and up and up because we have the wrong attitude. So we can have these laws, but if we don't change the attitudes, then we'll be in trouble. Now, I just want to make one funny remark, a light one, that look at the issue of surnames. A man and a woman marry, but the children take the man's surname, as if the woman does not exist at all. And what does this say down the line? So we need to address these issues. And Babzulu will agree with me that in the past, we didn't have this type of, say, names. It was introduced by the colonials, and now we've embraced it. So it means my son will be Tipanyane, as if his mother does not exist. So it's a mindset, which we've been slowly and gently indoctrinated to see women as inferior. And we need to be very, very careful that one would actually want to argue that the indoctrination of racism goes hand in hand with indoctrination of gender violence. And therefore, we have to tackle both equally. In our country today, if someone uses the K word, the whole roof comes down. But as Natezulu says, if someone makes a disparaging remark about a woman, people laugh. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Advocate. And a very special thank you to Mr. Zulu, Ms. Mkeni, and to you, Advocate Tipanyane. Your words have offered direction and clarity to those that are on the platform today. So thank you very much for joining us on our panel today. Next, may I welcome Mr. Nakedi Mulbanan, Mr. Nakedi, who will showcase his virtual poem with us.
Greetings to the leadership. Let me start off by observing protocol. Commissioner Edward Kieswetter, the SARS leadership, our honorary guest of speaker, Advocate Tipanyane, ladies and gentlemen, you are all welcome to this August event. I am the protector would be my discussion with you. Orikie kai. Nkhalele ubani. Zipfuna imani. Ndichireredzwa nganyi. In this vile and violent world, where we have lost all elements of humanity, where we have normalized the cruel syndrome of the jungle life, I refuse to be the perpetrator, for I know myself as the protector. Wie mag my uitsorg? Nyalong felan. O fela tharing ke ga eng o le ntse. Nano ga furela motlana o mphumule dikeledi. The order of today starts with the economic status. The less privileged is viewed as the worthless. Our haves determine the choices of who we protect because class plays judge. Yiba iqhawe lami undihlangule entlungwini. Ntata isetseleng e kgopo o nketse kgosigadi ya gago. Reko la hao e be lerato ho nna le bana baka. Gonne re bana ba mmala o sibilo bana ba thari. My hands were made to slave for the weak and protect them. My mind wanders in the thoughts of supporting and building my weak society. My heart yearns for the bright future of all mankind, as I am and will always be the protector. While my people are in turmoil, while my children's future is in disarray, my most vulnerable persons are my mothers and sisters, my persons with disabilities who gets the worst wrath of the scourge. If we brand ourselves in unity against the scourge, when we unite to fight against the monstrous killer, we will always remember that we are the protectors. You are the protector, and I am the protector. Thank you, Program Director. Thank you, our distinguished guests.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nakeri. You bring such a powerful message with the poem that you just shared with us. Right now, I'd like to hand over to our KwaZulu-Natal Women in Leadership Chairperson, Ms. Nelly Desele, who will give us the vote of thanks.
Program Director, our distinguished guest, Advocate Tediso Tipanyana, SARS leadership, fellow colleagues, good afternoon. SARS aspires to create a safe, diverse, equal, inclusive, conducive, and gender-based free and femicide-free environment for all to realize their full potential. A SARS-free gender-based violence and femicide is more than a goal. It's working towards diversity, inclusion, and belonging. I wish to express my gratitude to our Program Director, Ms. Charlotte Gavenda, for directing us in this important event. Our gratitude further goes to Advocate Tediso, who has taken time to attend this event. Thank you for allowing us to persuade you to be part of our event. Being the pioneer you are, we commit in your presence to ensure our concerted effort for change. Thank you for honoring us with your presence. With that said, we would like to thank you, colleagues, for taking time out of your busy schedules to be part of this event to commemorate International Day and for the elimination of violence against women and the launch of 16 days of activism against gender-based violence and femicide campaign. We see no better way to commemorate them than to honor them with our individual commitment to make a change and ensure gender-based violence and femicide-free SARS, a safer work environment, and a safer South Africa at large. Our gratitude further goes to the Commissioner for encouraging all SARS employees to make a commitment to take tangible actions that will see the organization become a gender-based violence and femicide-free environment. Mr. Den Zulu for supporting and championing change, supporting the various interventions throughout SARS, particularly being the custodian and leading the KZN Men's Forum, and supporting other regions as they embed men's forums. The wellness team for your unwavering support and ongoing support for the well-being of SARS employees, particularly given the ravaging effects of two pandemics, COVID-19 and GBVF. Ms. Mandisa Megeni and Gender Equality and Persons with Disability Unit, the National and Regional Employment Equity Forums representatives for their effort and collaborations on the journey to ensuring SARS achieves equity and equality. Thank you to the communications team and IT team for their continuous support in ensuring that all our events run seamlessly and are successful. And lastly, the participant on the program, our host and the organizing team. Remember, elimination of gender-based violence and femicide is our collective responsibility. I thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nelly. We have received such wonderful comments and questions from each one of you, and we thank you for that. I do apologize we weren't able to touch all the questions, but we will keep them in mind as we execute the work and respond to gender-based violence. I would like to now hand back the platform to Commissioner for his final word. Thank you, Commissioner. It's lovely to see Commissioner back on the platform, but unfortunately we can't hear him very clearly. We see that he is connecting with audio, so please be patient. Commissioner, lovely to see you, but if you could please unmute.
Good afternoon again.
Thank you, Commissioner.
And thank you to you, Charlotte, Madam Program Director, for so ably steering us through the important need in our society and the urgent need in our society to have a look at ourselves and to realize that we are woefully inadequate when giving expression to women to exist equal to men. There is no rand value you can put onto the life worth $10 million. But we know that that's not true. All we have to ask is, how much do we value why then would we value the life of another human being any less if we value our own life as highly as we do? And so I think for every man on this platform, and if we truly believe that every human life has equal worth and that no life is more important, more valuable others any differently to the way we wish to be treated. I listened to Advocate Chaliso Tipanyani referring to the full principle on which relationships are built is indeed, as is so explicitly stated in the good book, treat others the way you wish to be treated. And that must be central to how we treat our women and the most vulnerable in our society, because every human life has equal worth. And if that to do no harm, then I want to leave you with a deeply spiritual conviction that should guide each of us. You do to yourself. In other words, there is so much wisdom in the conviction that the best way to be kind to oneself is to be kind to others. The best way to forgive yourself is to be loving and compassionate towards others. Because it is truly so that that which you do to another, you will do to yourself, whether that which you do is good or ourselves, that the best way to unlock that is to be good, kind, and compassionate towards others. And in this spotlight, I want us to other, but most importantly, in this time of observing a sense and message of activism against women abuse, how we will continue to work towards setting reflect on how we build our relationships, nurture and care for the women among us. Thank you very much. And once again, thank you for including me in this wonderful platform. Thank you, Mandi, Makedi, and Nelly. Have a wonderful Friday afternoon.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. And I think that's your words of We are first human, and I think to be treated or to treat others the way we want to be treated is a very important message. So thank you for those final remarks. We have unfortunately come to the end of our program, and I owe special gratitude to everyone online who has graced us with their presence and made this event a resounding success. Thank you to all those that contributed to the production of this auspicious event. Thank you all once again for taking out the time and your attention. Be safe and enjoy this festive season. Remember to be the voice and be the change that you want to be. Thank you for joining us today.
May we please stop the music? May we please stop the music? Thank you.
Presenter, we were just moving the attendees. That's why I didn't stop the music.
Oh, sorry.
We are still recording.
May we stop recording?